The courtroom plunged into an oppressive silence, the kind that presses against your chest like a heavy weight and makes your heart pound with an almost unbearable intensity, as Judge Sonia Sotomayor leaned forward with deliberate authority, her gavel poised in her hand like a gleaming weapon ready to strike. Her piercing, unyielding gaze locked onto John Kennedy, a soft-spoken Louisiana senator with a reputation for asking the most challenging, thought-provoking questions, who stood trembling yet resolute at the witness stand, his knees shaking beneath the polished wood. The tension had been simmering and building for hours during a grueling, emotionally charged congressional hearing on judicial oversight, a session that had already seen heated exchanges and raised voices, and now, with a single, sharp, resounding rap of her gavel that echoed off the high ceilings, she declared in a voice that brooked no argument, "Senator Kennedy, your time is up. You will not utter another word unless I, and only I, permit it." The words sliced through the thick air like a blade, a command intended to silence him permanently, to erase his presence from the proceedings. But what transpired in the moments that followed would reverberate through the hallowed halls of justice, sending shockwaves that would leave everyone in the room, and the millions of viewers watching the live stream online, stunned into a profound, disbelieving silence that lingered long after the gavel fell. John Kennedy was far from just another politician climbing the rungs of power. He had been born and raised in a small, remote bayou town in Louisiana, a place where the waters of the Mississippi Delta shaped the lives of its people, where he'd grown up watching his father, a weathered fisherman with calloused hands and a heart full of dreams, struggle tirelessly to feed their modest family after a devastating hurricane tore through their community, wiping out their livelihood with ruthless efficiency. His mother, a dedicated schoolteacher with a fierce, unshakable love for justice and a spirit that refused to be broken, had instilled in him a deep, abiding belief that every single voice, no matter how small or overlooked, deserved to be heard, deserved to matter in the grand tapestry of society. That foundational belief had carried him through the grueling years of law school, where he survived on a hard-earned scholarship, scraping by with late-night study sessions and meager meals, through the long, exhausting years of defending underprivileged clients in cramped courtrooms with flickering lights, and finally into the lofty chambers of the Senate, where he became known and beloved for his folksy, down-to-earth demeanor and his unyielding, almost stubborn pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. Today, however, he faced the greatest, most daunting challenge of his entire career. The hearing was intended to address serious, troubling allegations of judicial overreach, a systemic issue that threatened the very fabric of fairness, and John had come prepared with concrete evidence, meticulously gathered documents, heartfelt testimonies from affected citizens, that pointed to deep-rooted problems within the court itself, including decisions that disproportionately harmed rural communities like the one he had emerged from, communities that felt forgotten by the powers that be. Sotomayor's abrupt interruption came at the most critical juncture, just as John was about to present a pivotal, heart-wrenching piece of evidence, a handwritten letter from a young widow in his district named Maria Delgado, a woman whose life had been shattered by circumstance. The widow had written to him in a state of raw, desperate anguish, her shaky, tear-stained handwriting spilling out a devastating story of profound loss, her husband killed in a tragic, preventable factory accident that left her grieving and alone, her life savings drained to the last penny by exorbitant legal fees she could scarcely afford, and now her precious children facing the imminent threat of homelessness as the bank moved to foreclose on her modest home. John had made a solemn, unbreakable promise to her during a late-night phone call, his voice steady with conviction as he assured her that he would fight with every ounce of his being to save her family, and this high-stakes hearing was his one, golden opportunity to keep that promise, to give her a voice in a system that had silenced her. But as Sotomayor's gavel crashed down with finality, he felt the crushing weight of that promise slipping through his fingers like sand, vanishing into the void. The judge's stern, almost imperious expression suggested she viewed him as little more than a nuisance, a senator overstepping his bounds with reckless abandon, and the room seemed to close in around him, the walls narrowing as the air grew thick with judgment. His colleagues on the panel shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding his gaze with guilty glances, others whispering furtively among themselves in hushed, conspiratorial tones. The media, perched like eager vultures with pens poised over notebooks, scribbled furiously, ready to spin the moment into a sensational headline that would dominate the news cycle for days. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, John hesitated, his resolve wavering under the intense scrutiny. The suffocating fear of public humiliation, of failing Maria and the countless other faceless individuals depending on him to be their champion, gnawed at his insides like a relentless predator. He thought of his father's weathered, sun-scorched hands hauling nets from the bayou, his mother's tearful prayers whispered in the dim light of their tiny kitchen, and the countless long, sleepless nights he'd spent poring over case files by the glow of a single lamp, preparing for this very day with a determination that bordered on obsession. Then, in the depths of that uncertainty, something profound shifted inside him, a spark of fiery defiance ignited, fueled by years of watching the powerless be ignored, their cries drowned out by the machinery of bureaucracy. He straightened his shoulders with a slow, deliberate motion, adjusted his slightly crooked glasses with a trembling hand, and met Sotomayor's formidable gaze with a quiet, steely intensity that belied the storm raging within. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and resolute despite the tremor that coursed through his hands, "I cannot, in good conscience, stay silent when a widow's tears stain the paper on my desk, and her children's fragile future hangs in the balance, teetering on the edge of despair. You can strike my words from the official record with a single stroke of your pen, but you cannot erase her story, her humanity, from the hearts of those who hear it." The courtroom erupted into a collective gasp, a sound that rippled through the room like a wave crashing against the shore. Sotomayor's eyes narrowed into slits, her lips tightening into a thin, unyielding line that spoke of her displeasure. "Senator, you are egregiously out of order," she snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a whip, sharp and commanding. "I will have you forcibly removed from this chamber if you persist in this insolence." The threat hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud of authority, and two burly bailiffs stepped forward with synchronized precision, their imposing presence a stark, intimidating reminder of the power she wielded within these walls. John's heart raced like a runaway train, the pounding in his chest almost deafening, but he refused to back down, his resolve hardening like steel. Instead, with a determined glint in his eye, he reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out Maria's letter, the paper creased and softened by her tears, holding it aloft like a sacred relic. "This isn't about me or my career, Your Honor," he declared, his voice rising with passion. "It's about her, about Maria. And if you won't allow me the dignity of reading it aloud, I'll leave it here for the world to see, for the public to judge for themselves." With a gesture of quiet defiance, he placed the letter on the witness stand, its edges curling slightly in the dry air, and stepped back, his stance a silent roar of resistance against the tide of authority. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambled from their seats, cameras flashing like lightning as they fought to photograph the letter, their voices overlapping in a frantic cacophony. Senators on both sides of the aisle leaned forward in their chairs, their curiosity piqued, their expressions a mix of shock and intrigue. Sotomayor's face flushed with a deep, angry red, her composure cracking under the pressure, but before she could respond with another rebuke, a junior judge on the panel, a compassionate woman named Elena Marquez, rose to her feet with a grace that belied her nerves. Elena had grown up in a similar rural community to John's, a place of muddy roads and humble homes, her own family once evicted from their land due to a heartless legal oversight that left them destitute. She had spent her entire career trying to reform the judicial system from within, often clashing with Sotomayor's more traditional, rigid views in late-night debates that tested her patience. "Your Honor," Elena said, her voice trembling with emotion but firm with conviction, "I move to allow the senator to proceed without further interruption. This is a matter of urgent public interest, a cry for justice that we cannot, in good faith, turn away from or ignore." The motion caught Sotomayor completely off guard, her authority challenged in a way she hadn't anticipated, and after a tense, protracted pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, she relented with a curt nod, though her glare never softened, her eyes burning with unspoken resentment. John took a deep, shuddering breath to steady himself, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and began to read Maria's letter aloud in a voice that carried the weight of her suffering. His voice cracked with emotion as he described the horrific details of her husband's death in that cold, unfeeling factory, the unbearable grief that followed, the coldness of the foreclosure notice that arrived like a death sentence, and her desperate, heart-wrenching plea for help that had brought him to this stand. The courtroom grew unnaturally still, the earlier tension replaced by a collective, visceral ache that seemed to bind them all together. Even Sotomayor's stern expression softened slightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she listened, her humanity peeking through the cracks of her judicial armor. When John finished, he looked up with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph and said, "This isn't just one woman's solitary story, isolated and forgotten. It's the story of thousands, men, women, and children, whose lives have been upended by a system that fails them. And I'm here to fight for them, to stand as their voice, not to bow to protocol or bend to pressure." The room broke into spontaneous, thunderous applause, a rare, unifying moment in a chamber so often divided by ideology and partisanship, the sound echoing off the walls like a triumphant anthem. The aftermath was a whirlwind of chaos but also a catalyst for transformative change. The letter, now a symbol of resistance, went viral within hours, its words shared across social media platforms and news outlets, sparking a passionate, nationwide conversation about judicial accountability and the need for reform. Maria's case was reopened with renewed urgency, her story galvanizing legal teams and advocates who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. A grassroots movement emerged from the ashes of that courtroom battle, led by John and Elena with unwavering determination, a coalition of ordinary citizens, lawyers, and activists who refused to be silenced. They faced fierce resistance, powerful lobbyists with deep pockets, entrenched interests with long memories, and even vicious personal attacks that targeted their reputations, but their resolve only grew stronger with each obstacle. John spent countless late nights in his office, the dim light casting shadows on the walls as he drafted legislation with meticulous care, his pen moving across the page with a purpose that drove him forward. Elena worked tirelessly behind the scenes, her soft-spoken pleas swaying her colleagues in private meetings, her arguments rooted in the shared experiences of their youth. Months turned into a year, a grueling marathon of effort, but their persistence paid off when, after a contentious vote, a groundbreaking bill passed that established an independent review board for judicial errors, a direct, tangible result of that dramatic courtroom showdown that had changed the course of their lives. As the credits would roll on a 30-minute YouTube video capturing this saga, the camera would pan slowly to John visiting Maria's newly secured home, now saved from the brink of foreclosure, her children laughing and playing joyfully in the sunlit yard, their voices a melody of hope. His voiceover, warm and reflective, would carry a powerful, inspiring message to the audience. Justice isn't just an abstract word carved into the stone of a courtroom, it's a living, breathing promise we make to each other, a commitment to lift up those who have fallen. Stand up with courage, speak out with conviction, and never, ever let anyone silence your story or dim your light. The screen would fade to black, leaving viewers with hearts stirred, minds awakened, and a renewed belief in the power of one voice to ignite change and reshape the world for the better.